warmed up. And quick as you can say, Bob's your uncle, the most unusual things begin to happen.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel, and thanks again for all the subscribers and for the comments and the conversations I'm having with people watching the videos and the other booktubers. It's really awesome. So please like the videos and subscribe if you're new to this and you like what I'm doing. This is an announcement of a regular feature I'm going to do on the channel. Not exactly sure how it's going to pan out, but I quite like the idea. And basically what I'm going to do, this kind of regular feature is going to be called Spotlight on Short Stories. So once a month I'm going to do a video that's specifically about the short stories. So it could be about a particular story, could be about an anthology, could be about a particular author that's good at them, or wants to talk about a particular book that an author's written about short stories or with short stories, or it could be something else that I haven't thought of yet, but one of those kind of things. So every month there will be a video that I'll link to the idea of Spotlight on Short Stories, and it will be a chance to talk about a short story as a form, to celebrate it, and to talk about some of the authors that I know I regularly read short stories from. But also I'm going to be discovering some stuff from some anthologies that I've got that I haven't read, and I'm going to reread some of my favourite anthologies, reread some of my favourite short story books as well, and in time hopefully there'll be some really good things that maybe we'll all discover together, because maybe you can suggest some stuff as well and I can read it and then I can talk about it in one of those short story videos. So just off the bat, before you get to the end, I'm not going to say this at the end, I'll say it now. If you can suggest some short stories that you love that I may not have read, that'd be awesome. But in the meantime, I'm just going to start this video by just talking about short stories and talking about some of the anthologies I might play with, some of the authors that I am familiar with, that I've read a lot of, and we'll go from there. So the short story as a form is a particular kind of beast. It's a great way of projecting an idea and not spending loads and loads of time world building, or not necessarily having a lot of character development, or usually there is enough for the story to work, but normally a novel or a series of novels is where you get all the characterization and the world building. So the short story is like a really nice concise way of bringing out an idea, and it could be an idea that absolutely blows your mind, or it could be an idea that just makes you smile or makes you laugh, or makes you think a different way about something, or it could be someone updating an old trope or an old cliche. It could be anything like that, and sometimes some really good writers write little 4-page vignettes that just kind of, add to your day, but they're not like the best thing they've ever written, but they're still really cool little stories. So short stories are wonderful things. I read mostly science fiction and fantasy, and that whole world has been built around the short story, because I'm not sure if you guys know, but although back in the 50s, when science fiction became much more of a defined genre, it was the short story anthology magazines that was really pushing that and making science fiction a thing and making fantasy a thing. And the industry that's been built up since then has obviously been more about novels and novel series and things like that, but the short story was a huge part of science fiction and fantasy history, and loads and loads of classic stories have had a huge influence on those writers and on TV and film and all sorts of things like that. So I will be dabbling into that a little bit, probably in this video as well as in future videos when I do this monthly spotlight on short stories. Okay, so having said that about the importance of short stories in science fiction, there are loads of examples of great classic short stories just in general fiction, and I know they get studied at A-level and degree level literature, and I know that it's a form that is well respected, but some people do gloss over it and think that, oh no, short stories aren't for me because they're too short and you can't develop the world or the characters very well. And I think that's a real shame, because short stories can be enough pages so you can get some of that And obviously, like I've been saying, there are some amazing stories out there that you're missing out on if you just write off the whole form. So short stories are well worth exploring, and I'm looking forward to looking at that. Make sure I do it once a month in this Spotlight on Short Stories. So, one of the things I'll be looking at is anthologies. So I'm going to show you some of the anthologies I've got, and obviously I'm going to find some in between as well. So, start with this one. This, Brave New World, is a really good anthology. It's got a subtitle. Dystopian Stories by Ursula K Le Guin and J.G. Ballard, Orson Scott Card. Shirley Jackson's in there as well. It's a really good collection, Brave New World. I've read this before, but I might delve into it again for this monthly thing. So that's a really nice collection, Brave New Worlds. I mean, you don't have to go dystopian. You could just try and find an anthology based on the Weird West. So this is the Wild West, but done with a slightly different slant, partly because the writers like Alistair Reynolds is there, and Orson Scott Card again, Tad Williams, Joe Lonsdale. So there's going to be a little bit of a twist to the tales probably. I haven't read this, so this could be something I could be reading as part of this project for looking into more short stories. It could also fit into Michael K. Vaughan's June Wild West thing as well, can it? But so Dead Man's Hand, an interesting anthology there that I picked up, which is all based around stories based around the Wild West. Again, this is one I've read before, but I'm definitely curious to read it again. Curse of the Full Moon. So I love werewolves, and this is a werewolf anthology. Again, lots of famous authors. So Ursula K Le Guin, George R.R. Martin, Michael Moorcock, Gene Wolfe, Neil Gaiman, Harlan Ellison, Ramsey Campbell, Tanith Lee, loads, Joe Lonsdale again if I haven't said it. Yeah, loads and loads of important authors there. Curse of the Full Moon. I got this partly because of the list of authors and because I love werewolves. So again, probably worth having a look at these stories again for this little project. And another one that I nearly looked into for one of the other challenges that's come up recently on BookTube, but this is new fairy tale, so more sort of modern take on some old fairy tale tropes, and again an interesting list of authors, this time edited by Stephen Jones with Alan Lee illustrations, which is quite cool, isn't it? Alan Lee obviously famously did Lord of the Rings illustrations. So fairy tales and stories of the grim and gruesome. Notice the grim spelling there. This is an interesting one. I really like this book. I've had this a long time. The Armchair Horror Collection. This is a collection of stories that are based around things that have been on TV and in film, and so it's kind of stories that have influenced them or have made an impact on TV and film. So that's quite a nice collection. It's quite a big one. So there's loads and loads of stories in that one, and again some really interesting authors on that one. So the Armchair Horror Collection, I could delve into that one. Yeah, I mean, this one's got H.G. Wells, Rod Serling, Algernon Blackwood, Roald Dahl, Edgar Allan Poe, H.P. Lovecraft, J.B. Priestley, Arthur Conan Doyle, John Wyndham, Simak, Stephen King, Richard Matheson, Ray Bradbury, Robert Bloch. I mean, you know, some of the biggest names in this speculative fiction area is in this book. So, yeah, a really nice book, that one, the Armchair Horror Collection. This is one I bought quite recently. I saw this when I was looking for Joe Haldeman books, and I thought this was really interesting. This is a short story anthology that he's edited, so clearly he does have a story in there, but there's lots of other authors' stories in there as well. And the idea is it's an anthology of science fiction anti-war stories. So that intrigued me, and I thought I'd have a look at that. So that was one that I was going to read soon. I haven't read this book. I may have read some of the stories in it, I'm not sure, but I haven't read this collection. So I'll be looking at that one as well. But these are the kind of anthologies you can find which are really interesting, I think. And also you can go, I mean, I found this secondhand. You could just find generic things that are just celebrating a particular nationality, which is famous Chinese short stories. So I found this secondhand and I thought, oh yeah, I'll get this. And I'm really intrigued to read this. So I'm hoping this will give me some new windows into other short story forms, but we'll have a look. So famous Chinese short stories again. You could find anthologies that go into that kind of angle, and you often find stuff like this. So again, talking about science fiction, you often get these science fiction magazine anthology best ofs. You get a lot of these. And when I first started reading, when I was a teenager, I read a lot of these kind of things. And I read like Hugo Award winner anthologies, Asimov, and Brian Aldiss did a lot of, and Harry Harrison did a lot of editing of those books. They're always worth finding because they are really good stories. Some of my favourite stories were from those books. And yeah, so things like that. I found that one recently. Again, a good opportunity to find some new authors maybe, or just to read some good stories from those magazines from authors you may already know. And then going out of science fiction for a second, I found this book, which I snapped up because I love the cover. Again, I've talked about Tom Gould before in my book cover video, and I forgot I had this one as well. But this is a collection of funny short stories, or funny short prose, and I think there's poems in there as well. But Funny Ha Ha, edited by Paul Merton, so a lot of British people will know who Paul Merton is. This looks like a really interesting anthology, which I want to get into, and hopefully, if it is as funny as the title suggests, then that'll give me a little bit of a snicker when I most need it. But yeah, this is like an unusual one. You don't see this sort of thing very often, and I love the way it feels and the cover. It's very cool. Who's in here? So you've got Margaret Atwood, famously funny author, Mikhail Bulgakov. I've got The Master and Margarita to read, actually. Chekhov, Peter Cook and Dudley Moore, Noel Coward. This is called Joyce Grenfell, Galton and Simpson, who wrote The Steptoe Son, I think, or may have written Hancock's Half Hour, something like that. Nora Ephron, Somerset Maugham, Spike Milligan, Joyce Carol Oates, Edgar Allan Poe, Mark Twain, Kurt Vonnegut, H.G. Wells, Oscar Wilde, P.G. Wodehouse, Victoria Wood. Whole load of people in this book, so this could be a really interesting thing to read. So anthologies are a good mine of stuff that could be cool for a short story exploration. So as well as that, there are clearly not just anthologies of lots of other authors, but just collections from one specific author. And I've got a lot of those because some of my favourite writers, when I started reading many, many years ago, wrote a lot of short stories. So let's have a look at this for a second. So I'm going to start by talking about Ted Chiang again, because these were relatively recent reads. I read these, Exhalation and Stories of Your Life. I read these two books a couple of years ago. A couple of years ago, and I absolutely love them. They're two of my favourite books, easily. Two of the best books I've ever read. If you haven't read anything by either of these books by Ted Chiang yet, he's only released these two books as far as I know. If you haven't read either of these two books, you really should, because they are so fantastic. They're full of short stories, and each short story is worth reading. There isn't a weak one among them, and a lot of them are literally the best stories I've ever read. They are so good. So sounds like I'm just putting like a ridiculous amount of hysterical praise on these two books, but honestly they are so good. I did a video about them a while back, and hopefully they're good enough to kind of convey how good the stories are. But honestly, you should definitely read these two books because they're phenomenal. He explores human nature and existence, and kind of like the meaning of life, love, memory, what matters to us through experiments in technology and science. So it's like he'll come up with what if this happened in society, in a scientific technology way, how would we react? And he's really insightful because he thinks of some great things. And definitely there's a few of my favourite short stories that are written by Ted Chiang. One of the authors that's made a huge career out of writing short stories, and he's written for television, and probably it's quite an adaptable thing to do, to write short stories and then write short screenplays, because he'd write sort of episodes of Star Trek and stuff like that, is the legend, Harlan Ellison. So I've got tons of Harlan Ellison books, and I am going to do a video on Harlan Ellison soon. But there's the Essential Ellison book, which is definitely worth reading. I mentioned this in the Canterbury Tales tag recently, but this is a nice one to dive into, and I might sort of just pick a few stories to talk about with him. And I've got loads of individual books that I'm reading again, just to kind of refresh myself about which stories were my favourites. But yeah, he is an interesting author, notoriously feisty and argumentative, and quite a lot to handle for TV producers and that, but an interesting brain. So there's Harlan Ellison. I am going to delve again into one of the kind of formative authors for me as a person. I mean, it had such an influence on me in growing up, and that is the Great Ray Bradbury. So obviously he is just a really important author. I mean, loads of people will sort of heap praise on him, like in Stephen King talks about what an influence he was and all that sort of stuff. Ray Bradbury is a really important. These are just a few of the books I have by him. I've got most of his books. But I also found this book quite recently, and I haven't seen this book before, and I bought this second hand. I was really delighted to see it because I hadn't seen it before, and this is a collection of short stories again. So I will be reading this one soon, and hopefully this will be contributing to something I'll be saying about Ray Bradbury. It would be nice it'd be nice if I can spend one of these months videos doing like a top 10 Ray Bradbury short story video or something like that. That'd be nice. I don't know if you guys have particular Ray Bradbury favourites. My all-time favourite short story is his, which is The Sound of Thunder, which is in that book, The Golden Apples of the Sun. But his books are full of fantastic stories, beautifully written. He's got a fantastic way of writing that is very poetic and beautiful, but also really vivid and immersive. So there's also things like Shirley Jackson's Lottery and Other Stories book, which I know the Lottery, but I haven't read the rest of this book yet, so I'm looking forward to reading more of her stuff, because I read the Lottery thanks to an anthology series with different authors in it. So I bought this because I wanted to read more Shirley Jackson. So I'm looking forward to looking at this one. This is a book that I bought because I'm working towards another time travel video, but it's kind of slow in progress because I've read a couple of books I didn't want to include because I didn't like them much, and I've got tons and tons of books to read. I've got a huge pile of time travel books that I want to go through and pick my favourites. But this is Robert Silverberg, and he's written loads of time travel stuff, short stories and novels. But this is a collection of short stories that features the story Needle in a Time Stack. So I know that's a time travel story, but I think the rest of the book are full of other short stories that are not time travel short stories. So I will be reading this anyway to see if I want to include that one as one of my recommendations for time travel on the back of this other video I did. But in the meantime, it'll be quite cool to read more Silverberg and see what the whole book's like. So that's another thing that I'm looking into. Ursula K Le Guin. I've raved about her before, and I've read several of her books, but I haven't read these two short story collections. They are also part of the Heinous cycle, so they are part of this sort of huge system of worlds that she created, but these are short stories. So there's two books worth, volume 1 and volume 2. So I'm looking forward to reading these as well. So another thing that I can use in my exploration of short stories. Also, I've got a number of Neil Gaiman short story books, and some of which I've read and some which I've only read bits of that I need to complete. So that's another thing that I'll be looking at as well. I mentioned these books in my book cover video, didn't I? Because I don't really like those covers. I think they're a bit boring. I can see why they like. Someone might like the design. It's very, very kind of simple, classic kind of thing, but I think it's a bit boring. I like the freaky ones, or the ones that just got really cool illustrations. But yeah, Neil Gaiman, I really like his writing, so I'm looking forward to that. This is one of my favourite short story collections, and it does feature one of the greatest Twilight Zone stories. Where are we? To Serve Man is in this book. So Daymond Knight and his book Far Out. So I'm looking forward to reading this again. To Serve Man is an incredible story, but the whole book's really good. So I want to read that again because I haven't read this for at least 30 years. So it'd be really cool to read that again. Far Out by Daymond Knight. This is one that I'm in the middle of reading, so I haven't finished this yet, but I'm definitely going to talk about this because he's a really interesting writer, and some of these stories are amazing. And that's the Ray Lafferty Best Of collection. So I got this because it was in the Masterworks series. I was intrigued, and I'd heard a little bit about it, and it was a bit of a risk, but I'm so glad that I started reading it because it's quite different, and he's got a very unique way of writing, I think. So it's quite odd, but in an interesting way. So R.A. Lafferty, I'll be looking into that a bit more, and I might choose him for one of the videos. Two of my all-time favourite authors that feature a lot in my past, and I'm probably going to mention them a number of times, and I know I already have mentioned them a few times. Richard Matheson. Just got Shock 2 down, but I've got tons and tons of his books. I think I've got all of his horror / science fiction / fantasy ones, but he wrote loads of westerns that I haven't got, and just the odd occasional sort of book that's not like any of those, but I've got all of these kind of books, so this is just one example, but his stories are awesome. So I'll probably mention Richard Matheson at some point, and Robert Sheckley has written he has written a lot more short stories than novels, and there's tons and tons of short stories out there. And some of my favourite short stories are written by him as well. They tend to be, his best ones tend to be kind of silly or funny or wry, a little bit odd, a little bit surreal, a bit absurd, that kind of thing. But he's quite good at doing that. His book, Journey of Jones, or Dimension of Miracles is another title for it. I am absolutely sure Douglas Adams read that before he wrote Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I think he did. There's Edgar Allan Poe's Tales of Mystery and Imagination. So I read this a long time ago, so I'm going to read Edgar Allan Poe again, and again with this idea of celebrating the short story form, and I'm looking forward to getting back into this. So that'll be one of the things I'll be looking at, and it might be that I'll read the book and then review that as my monthly contribution to the Spotlight on Short Stories. And Roald Dahl, obviously famous for lots and lots of children's books, but also has a really good reputation for adult short stories. So I've got these two books. I think I might have a third book as well, but I've definitely got these two books that I've put at a particular place in this room so that I can read them soon. So I don't know if you guys have read any of these, that one or that one. But let me know what you think. But I know he's a great author, and I'm looking forward to reading some of his. As far as I know, they're probably kind of like mysterious stories with a twist kind of thing, I think, but I don't know for sure. So I'm looking forward to that as well. Another short story book I've got by a very famous and influential and talked about author is Slow Bullets by Alastair Reynolds. So I bought this because I'm developing my knowledge and an opinion about Alastair Reynolds. I've read 4 of his books so far. Again, I haven't read Revelation Space yet, or any of those kinds of books, but I've got tons of them because I found a lot of them secondhand. But I wanted to buy this because I quite like the idea of seeing what he's like as a short story writer, and we'll see what we think. But Slow Bullets is another one that's on my list of things to develop for this idea. And Stephen King, another one of the great writers and another big part of my reading over the years. I've got a few books of short stories that I haven't. How many? 3, I think, that I haven't read yet. I've read. One of my favourite all-time books is Night Shift. I think that's just a phenomenal book, and I remember absolutely loving Skeleton Crew, and I might re-buy it again so I can read it again. I'm not sure, but I remember loving that when I was a teenager, and I've read his books on writing, but as far as his short fiction goes, I've got a few to read. This is apparently a really good one, I've heard, so I'm looking forward to looking at this as well. So again, Stephen King is awesome at writing short stories, and some of his best stories are short stories. I'm in the middle of doing 4 Past Midnight, which I started for the February Fantasy Stories challenge. So I need to finish that anyway, which is 4 short stories. So 3 other authors to finish with, and these authors are a bit different to these guys. So you've got Jose Saramago. I'd love to know if anyone's watching this and is a Jose Saramago fan, because I do want to do a video about him because I think he's brilliant. But possibly an acquired taste, but absolutely phenomenal. And if you haven't read Blindness, you really ought to read that, because it's like one of the best books ever. But this is a book of his short stories, so I'm looking forward to reading this. It's a very short book actually, but this is definitely one I'm looking forward to reading for my exploration of short stories. And guy, again, not like anything else that I've listed so far, but actually, to be fair, that's because he's not like anyone else, full stop. And that's Charles Bukowski. And this is quite a recent collection that was kind of celebrating an anniversary of his work, and they kind of released some unreleased stories and poems. So this is a relatively recent purchase. I've got tons and tons of his books, but this is a book that I want to read and see if these stories are as good as his older ones. They'll be dark. And then this is one that I thought was really interesting. This is 4 stories that are interconnected by Kim Bo-young, and the collection is called I'm Waiting for You. And they're set on 2 different worlds, but all 4 stories are related to each other. And it just looks really interesting from what I'd read about it. So this is definitely something I'll be reading soon. Again, it's another thing that is part of the exploration of short stories I'll be doing. So as you can see, there'll be lots of anthologies I'll be reading, lots of authors that I've been reading for most of my life that I'll be reading, and some new authors I haven't read before, and some authors that I've heard about but haven't read enough of, people like Roald Dahl that I've only read a few little bits of that I want to read more of. So all of that kind of thing will be a really cool exploration of the short story form. So every month I'll be putting a spotlight on short stories. What do you think are the best short stories out there?
Paint me a picture of what it's like to be you. You sit up on your high chair, on the outside looking through. I know where you're going.